Welcome to Economics Applied, a podcast sponsored by the Hoover Institution. My name is Stephen Davis, and I'm here today with my good friend, Stanford colleague, longtime research collaborator, and famous work-from-home guru, Nick Bloom. Thanks, Nick. It's great to have you on the show again. So earlier this month, you and I, we ran a 3-day conference at Stanford on the implications of remote work. It was with generous and gracious support from the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research and the Hoover Institution. And we saw many great papers and presentations. I think we had something like 28 in all. And we're going to chat about some of them today. Before we dive in, though, I just want to give a shout out to our co-conspirators in organizing the conference. So there's Jose Maria Barrero, Raj Chowdhury, Natalia Emanuel, and Emma Harrington. Hats off to all three of them for helping us organize a great conference and dealing with you and me, which can be challenging. So Nick, let's start with a topic that's been very much in the news, which is return to the office mandates, RTOs for short. What did we learn about RTOs at the conference?
So there were 4 papers related to RTOs at the conference. Pretty impressively collected data. They looked at up to 3,000 US firms, so the Russell 3000. Now basically any public listed firm you've ever heard of is in the Russell 3000 and many others as well. And they looked at what happens around RTO mandates. So to be clear, this includes both if you're fully remote and you ask people back 1 day a week, and what I think people have in mind is Amazon's just done, they've gone from 3 to 5 days. And they picked up 1,200 of them roughly. So they scraped news and all sorts of different sources. What did they find overall? A bunch of stuff. So first finding is bad performance is a predictor of an RTO mandate.
I love this finding. So you do an RTO when things are going badly.
Yeah, I mean, you can interpret this several ways. There's a positive way, yes, things are performing badly and you try and change it. There's a more negative view of, now's the time to try and distract. In the next earnings call, I want to blame it on something else. There's this joke of the grab bag of, CEOs will blame bad weather, union strike, bad luck. And at some point, they pull out the excuses called, working from home. And so you throw in the RTO.
It's the latest handy scapegoat under this
exactly
interpretation.
Right.
And as you pointed out, there's other possible interpretations.
So first thing is bad performance generally leads to RTO mandate. Second finding was the RTO mandate itself does not cause either better or worse accounting performance and causes no change in stock performance on average. So it's not good, it's not bad.
I was struck by that, and I think there are 2 separate studies independently performed that found that result, if I remember correctly. And it's consistent with a broader theme that I think comes out of a lot of our research, which is for many companies, RTO, not RTO, work from home a lot or not, is kind of close to a wash, which is sort of where you'd expect the market to eventually settle down. That a lot of firms are on the margin. For some, it really works well. For some, it doesn't. So I thought one way to interpret that is, we're not that far off right now from an optimal set of working arrangements.
It's a great interpretation. Before I forget, I was going to say the conference and all the papers are on the website. We have a website hosted by Hoover, which you can download all of it. And SEPA has details as well. Plus, we've been putting out LinkedIn summaries of a bunch of these papers. So yes, my interpretation, you're right, would be on average companies are getting it about right. So they're overly aggressively RTOing the market, we'll be marking them down. If they're not doing enough, we'll be marking them up. On average, it's about 0. That's correct. So I'll go through 2 other findings. A third finding is, not surprisingly, employees don't like it. So if you look at Glassdoor ratings absolutely plummet. Glassdoor being a website where employees can kind of anonymously rate and evaluate their companies. They take a nosedive after these RTOs, so not surprisingly, employees don't like it. And then the final finding, which perhaps is the most interesting, is an important predictor of an RTO is that you have an older male CEO. So noting they're neither good or bad, it suggests that demographics of the CEO definitely plays a part.
Right. So there was another I don't know if you want to talk more about the RTOs. I was going to segue to something that's related from a different paper, but let me see. Is there more you want to say about the RTO studies?
I mean, the final point is I've been asked a lot about Amazon. So what's going on around Amazon? So Amazon's kind of unusual in a couple of ways. One, obviously, its size and its lateness. So it's kind of a big late company to announce an RTO. Many of the RTO waves seem to have passed. If you look at the density of RTO announcements, one of the papers showed it, on the tail end, they seem to be petering out. The other is it's 5 days, which is also pretty unusual. Most of the RTOs, if you look at them, are calling folks back to the office, say 3 days from a more remote existence. My interpretation of what happened at Amazon is that this is primarily a headcount reduction. So I think what's gone on, and if you look at Andrew Jassy's memo, it's very consistent with this. They were looking to reduce headcount after having probably overhired in 21, 22 in the post-pandemic boom. In Jassy's memo, it talks about delayering managers, and it also talks about becoming smaller and more nimble. And so I think what's gone on is Amazon is super smart. I don't think they ever make mistakes. They think very carefully about it. They presumably internally done some maths and thought, well, look, if we're going to have to get rid of 5-10% of headcount, that's very expensive because you've got to pay a lot of severance, and it's pretty disruptive because you fire people, and if I'm fired and I'm in your group, you're already distressed, and you're distracted. You maybe don't work for the next month, and they've decided, well, look, a way we can do it is we can call people back to the office. Based on, for example, my paper in Nature a few months ago, we did a kind of reverse Amazon. It will predict it would increase quit rates by about a third. If Amazon's base quit rate is, say, 20-25%, you're looking at 5 to 10% extra quits. So their calculus is probably we will shrink headcount by 5 to 10%.
So you get quits instead of severance packages.
Exactly. Now, the obvious downside is you don't choose who leaves. And what that will mean is really hot areas like AI are going to be really negatively impacted. So, Amazon's in the same town as Microsoft, which is a big rival.
Well, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm not sure how it will play out for Amazon, but there's lots of anecdotal evidence that companies that put forth aggressive RTO policies loudly, publicly, quietly, behind the scenes, cut deals for their best employees that they were otherwise leave. So you may actually be able to get some selectivity in retention, even with an RTO policy. I don't know if that's the plan at Amazon, but it would not surprise me to find out a year from now that some people still don't go into the office 5 days a week at Amazon because their boss made a special deal for them.
I totally agree. A well-known company we've all heard of, I won't mention who, was saying their policy was 3 days in the office, but they knew from swipe cards it was 1.8. Yeah. And so it was clear that
okay, so there were a lot of exceptions.
There were a lot of exceptions. So on the Amazon point, you're correct. I mean, one interpretation, one outcome is 1st of January, it's supposed to start next year. They enforce it rigorously. They get 10% of quits, particularly from hot areas. And Amazon basically cuts costs at the expense of slowing growth because AI talent walks out the door. Another take is they are more flexible, and you're a top AI talent, and the manager says, "Shh, don't tell anyone else, but you can work at home 2 days a week." The problem is that doesn't say secret for long.
Right.
And then you have all kinds of problems. So that's not really the ideal management policy either. And Amazon tends to be pretty by the book and by the number, and So a third thing is at some point in March, April 2025, it just unravels because it's not being enforced. And Jassy says, well, we made a mistake. And he won't say that. It was actually, we're progressing, being a future-facing company, blah, blah, blah. We're going to 4 days or 3 days in the office.
You reminded me of a question we've asked in our survey of working arrangements and attitudes, in which we tried to get at this phenomenon of RTOs that then unraveled, and sometimes there was another RTO and even another RTO of the same company. So we asked workers in our survey, have there been any RTOs at your companies, I think since 2021, or I remember exactly how we phrased the question. If so, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there were some as high as 4, which obviously suggests the first 3 didn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think we may have even had a 5+ bucket.
Did we? Okay.
It was quite incredible. And I've shared that with quite a few people, and they're like, yeah, there was one company I have in mind that just seems to do a different RTO every 6 months,
Right.
It doesn't seem to stick.
There was another study that that connects to this somewhat. It's not remote work for workers and staff, but it's remote work by CEOs. Not in the context necessarily of RTOs, but you remember this study?
Yes.
I thought this was a fascinating study, and the study had data on where CEOs live. You can tell us where they live by and large. People can guess probably before you tell them. And how many CEOs work remotely, a surprisingly large number, and which kinds of companies are more likely to have remote CEOs.
I agree. So what they it turns out, as you say, surprisingly, there are a lot of CEOs for publicly listed companies in the US that work remotely. And the way they checked up on this is, the CEO and their spouse lives in a different state. Typically, it tends to be companies in what I would call as less CEO kind of favorable states tend to have more remote CEOs. So, basically there are lots of CEOs living in places like California and New York. There are far less. I think it was North Dakota. So if you have a company in like North Dakota, your local supply of CEO talent may be relatively limited, particularly if you're looking for a non-standard industry. Say you're a tech firm in North Dakota. I don't know how many publicly listed tech firms there are in North Dakota, maybe not many. But
there's old line manufacturing and agricultural enterprises in the Midwest, and so there's a lot of those.
Yeah, so the example is, the classic example is they find someone they want to appoint. He or she lives in, let's say, Pennsylvania, and they say, look, we are going to come to North Dakota 2 days a week, but we're going to stay in Pennsylvania the other 3 days a week because this is where my husband and my kids live or whatever it is, and so I'm not commuting. And the company says, fine, that's that's the best option we have. So what the study shows is A, this is quite common, surprisingly common. B, it doesn't last very long, and C, company performance is not fantastic. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but performance is lower with remote CEOs than in-person ones. Although it begs the question, as you raised earlier, what was the alternative?
Exactly.
So it may have been that you have a fantastic CEO in North Dakota, they retire, you're looking for a replacement, you can't find anyone good locally, so your next best option is to hire someone from Pennsylvania that comes in 2 days a week. The fact that the performance goes down a bit, maybe the alternative is hiring someone even worse in a replacement in North Dakota that really doesn't have the experience.
It illustrates an interesting trade-off that faces companies, not just for the CEO, but for other talented positions. So even if you accept the view that other things equal, you're more effective as a CEO or a high-level executive when you live near where the firm's headquarters are, that doesn't mean the best thing to do is to appoint somebody who lives near, because if you got a firm that's headquarters in Ohio or downstate Illinois, where the CEO talent pool may be thin, you may be able to get a much better CEO if you let them live somewhere and fly in every week. In fact, some of these contracts, this comes out in some of the SEC filings, some of these contracts explicitly say for the CEO, in addition to everything else he gets paid, we'll pay for him to fly back and forth to his residence every week. So that there's that trade-off, and that trade-off is present for other talented employees in the organization. So wider talent pool, but maybe each person is individually less productive, but you can get a better CEO. This paper also prompted me to think about, well, what do you want in a CEO? So some CEOs are maybe oriented towards motivated employees, operational efficiencies, building company culture and that sort of thing. Those things seem to require more on-site presence.
Right.
But some CEOs are really, they're deal making.
Yep.
And they're talking to clients and customers. And if your headquarters is somewhere in the Midwest and the other CEOs that you want to make deals with are in New York or in the Gulf region of Texas or in Southern California, that's where a lot of the CEOs lived. Often they lived right on the ocean front, by the way. There were some nice pictures in this study. If that's what you want your CEO to do, then it's actually pretty valuable for that CEO to be around a lot of other CEOs.
Yep.
And as I think we discussed at the conference, it makes me think of places like Jackson, Wyoming, where, it's a Jackson or Jackson Hole, I don't remember which one's which, but it's a very high-end place. A lot of CEOs spend time there, especially in the summer. And if you want to go and, get to know other CEOs, maybe think about what deals you might want to strike with them, you want to be where they are. So it also depends on what you want the CEO to do as to whether it's really important for the CEO to be on site most of the time.
Absolutely. You know, it reminds me, I'm going to mention a research paper that was not in this year's remote work conference, but I hope it will be next year. But it's by several authors, including Amit Seru, who's also at Hoover. And it's very related to this. They get data from something like 80,000 company boards. And they have transcriptions of the board meetings and basically can assess the effectiveness. And the main question of the paper is, are in-person board meetings better than hybrid or fully remote board meetings? And it's similar to what your point earlier is. The initial answer is yes, it looks like in-person board meetings are better. And you can get, all of us are in kind of board meetings for various organizations. And it's much easier in person. The breaks work out well. You chat over dinner. You have side conversations. So initially you think, well, this obviously means all board meetings should be in person. Because you realize there's 2 or 3 downsides to this. One is they're massively more time consuming. So a 4-hour board meeting, I'm on the American Economics Association, we have a 4-hour board meeting, but it would take a day to travel there and back for it. And so that makes the cost of them a lot higher. So therefore, A, you're going to hold them less frequently, and B, who you get is less good. In fact, someone in the conference said, I was asked to be on a board of a company in Australia, and I said, how many times do I have to be in person? They said 12, and the person said, forget it, I'm not flying every month. And then the other downside is also, if you want to have a board meeting that's very quickly assembled in response to, say, an emergency like the pandemic, clearly in person's much harder. So the so what for me seemed to be, you probably want some in person and some remote. The in person's like,
in other words, hybrid.
Yes, hybrid, although it turns out the hybrid meetings themselves weren't ideal because the people in person dominated it.
Right.
So they said, you can tell, because also they know which bits of the board notes you're reading.
I should be careful what I mean by hybrid.
Yeah,
some meetings in person and some
exactly right.
Some via Zoom or
so if you have, I don't
technology.
know, 2 a year in person and 4 a year in Zoom, and maybe the ones in Zoom can also, if you have an emergency one.
So let's go from CEOs of listed firms to tiny new startups, because there was some interesting evidence in the conference about the relationship between remote work and what is now a well-documented boom in business startups in the United States in the wake of the pandemic. So talk about that work.
Arpit Gupta and co-authors presented a paper that analyzed information on tens of thousands of businesses in the US. So he'd combined LinkedIn with various other data sets and looked at startups. And what he showed is post-pandemic, startups which he defined as firms less than 10 years old actually grew faster and were more productive if they were remote than in person. And the mechanism that he highlighted is much easier to hire people, and it's much easier to retain employees. And he showed this is particularly true for businesses that are disparate, so seem to, from their nature, say, have customers or suppliers all over the country. And he also had a performance measure, which is only really relevant for software companies, but it was lines of code uploaded to GitHub and showed they also seem to be more active. So we both live in Silicon Valley. I talked to an enormous number of VC startups, and they all have very differing views about this. So some, VCs will say, look, you've really got to be in person. Like Y Combinator is a big believer in being in person up in San Francisco, being in the dog patch, or other VCs that say we want you to conserve capital, hire people. It looks like, at least off this evidence, early stage, it may make more sense, at least post-pandemic, to be remote. It doesn't mean that you want to be remote forever. I could easily see a life cycle that, you hit 15, 20 people, and at this point you think we're getting to the stage, say we're going to hire an undergrad. That's someone who's going to benefit from some in-person mentoring, and we're going to go hybrid once we hit 30, 40 employees.
Well, the firms the startups you're talking about right now are among the elites of the startups. If they're in the running for VC funding, they're at the top end of the startup distribution. But the statistics about what's happened in the United States, that's part of it. But another part of it is really very small firms. They're never going to get VC funding. And there are many more of them now, and they seem to have the capacity to scale up faster. And the way to understand this, I think this makes perfect sense from an economic perspective, because you think about somebody who wants to start a small company and they don't live in a major city. They live in a more remote area, maybe an ex-urban area or even a rural area. And you need some bookkeeping services, you need some marketing services, and some sales and some technical people. And maybe you only need 20 hours a week of some of those people. And you might not be able to find anyone in the local economy who really fits the exact requirements that you're looking for, let alone somebody who'll work for 20 hours in a startup, which is often a risky enterprise. But to the extent you can make some of these jobs fully or partly remote, you've suddenly enormously expanded the pool from which you can draw on for the services you need to make your business get off the ground. And that fact is consistent with the boom in business startups, but also the fact that a lot of these startups are really small. They've gotten smaller in terms of number of employees, or few of them actually make the transition to employee. So yes, more startups, but yes, especially more small-scale startups, which I view as a good thing for two reasons. One, it just opens up a new set of opportunities for people who want to guide their own economic lives by building their own business. But secondly, among these millions of new businesses, a few of them will hit it really big. And 10 years, 20 years down the road, some of them will be large employers in their local community, or maybe even household names. So this kind of let's foster lots of startup business activity, because it will lead to good things down the road for communities and possibly even for the national economy. I see the rise of remote work as really facilitating that, and that seems to be borne out by the data.
It's a good lesson for policymakers. You wouldn't have thought, every policymaker wants to have their area, the boom time for startups. Being British, I grew up there, and in Britain we were enviously looking at Silicon Valley and thought, oh my gosh, why can't we have more startups, and why can't we be more entrepreneurial like the Americans? You would have, it's surprising, but it sounds like promoting work from home is a big driver of this. Interesting enough, an anecdote I've heard, I don't know how true this is another driving source is, if you look in transaction data from companies like Stripe that have a lot of startups that start life there, they're often very, very small, so small that the individuals have other jobs at the same time. And so if you have two jobs, it's obviously much easier to do your start, or you have one job in a startup, it's obviously much easier if the startup's remote.
Right.
So I think, having talked to funders of startups, they say it's very typical actually. Someone starts, I don't know, selling World War II memorabilia medals or something, and it starts to take off, and at some point, once their revenue hits 50,000 a year, they drop their first job and move over.
Right. So I like this aspect of this consequence of the remote work rise a great deal for a whole variety of reasons. So let's turn to change direction slightly. We've been talking a lot about the business side of things. There were also some studies that suggested the rise of remote work opens up new kinds of labor market opportunities. So one that, well, you're a co-author on this study, so let's turn to that, which is there's some emerging evidence that the rise of remote work is facilitating labor force participation and employment at greater rates among people who have various physical impairments. It could be everything from, it's painful for me to walk upstairs, to I'm in a wheelchair, and I have limited vision, or I need special facilities to be able to work. Tell us what you've been finding in that respect, because I think it's a really hopeful aspect of this whole rise of remote.
Yes, so Gordon presented the paper with Dan Olof-Roth, and so what we did is, stepping back, in the US post-pandemic, there's about 2 million more people with a disability that are working than were in 2019. So the number of Americans with a disability that are working is pretty stable at 6 million, for many years, and then it's really risen. And if you look at most of that growth has come from folks with a physical disability. Now, the total stock of people with a physical disability is very stable, so just more of them are working. And why are more of them working? We see it's almost entirely driven by occupations that allow remote work. And having at this point interviewed, and in the Sway survey, we surveyed thousands of people about it, the story turns out to be relatively straightforward. If I have a disability, let's say I have a very bad back, I struggle to walk, I have maybe a colostomy bag, I have poor eyesight, commuting is often hard. It's really hard to commute into work. But also, your working conditions in work may not be ideal. So, for example, if I have a bad back, I may need some special sitting position, which the classic Dilbert-like desk chair may not allow. Or I have a colostomy bag and I want particular bathroom arrangements, and I just can't do it.
Right.
So when you interview people, there's a bunch of people, including friends, my parents, who would have said, look, I would work, if I was allowed to say work from home 3 days a week and only had to go in twice, because that barrier to work is so much less painful. If you're going to make me come in 5 days a week, I'm not going to work. And so it looks like there is a huge rise in employment of Americans with a disability because of this. This is amazing news for everyone,
yes.
even if you're not affected by it, because A, these folks are paying, higher taxes, they're helping to reduce the horrendous deficit, and B, they're producing goods and services, pushing down inflation. So we all benefit, and it's one of the many unexpected benefits of remote work, that it's increasing the labor supply, helping keep all of our taxes and prices down.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with you. This is a tremendously positive development, and I would add to what you said, an obvious but important point here is American society is getting older.
Yep.
By and large, and physical infirmities that make it hard to, say, commute on the bus 5 days a week to the office tend to rise with age. So this problem is already severe, serious. You gave some numbers about the millions of people who are currently working and are now the extra couple million who are working who have physical disabilities. But the need for flexible working arrangements that can accommodate people with all kinds of limitations, not total limitations on their ability to work, but limitations on where they do it and how often they have to commute. So this is great news. We've chatted about this on many occasions. I don't think we have any solid evidence on it. Maybe you can point me to some I'm not aware of. But it's not just physical disabilities that are potentially relevant here. Some people have social and psychological characteristics where they find it difficult to deal with large numbers of other people. And so they may be perfectly happy working from their computer screen on at home. They may be actually excellent employees in that respect. They're not comfortable transiting on a crowded bus or being in an open air office with 50 other employees. At least they're not comfortable doing that all the time. So that's not so much what we normally think of as a physical disability, but there's an open question of how many of these people would come into the office, or not come into the office, but what would work if given the opportunity to work mostly remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a good friend that falls into this situation of, very happy working, but doesn't really want to be in the office all day, every day. It's intense kind of social pressure. She doesn't particularly want to be in a very, she doesn't like background noise. Likes a bit of peace and calm. I can totally understand that. As an academic, we like our calm time. Right. So yeah, there's a lot of folks in that situation. People that don't like fluorescent lights. I've spoken to someone that was immunocompromised, and she said, look, she was fully remote and said, it's really just too hard for me to go in. I'm taking a risk and I have to be very careful and wear masks, and it's not a very pleasant situation. So yeah, it turns out there are roughly, I think, 25 million Americans with various forms of disability. So that's an enormous group of people.
Right.
Many, many millions of them more would probably work if you let them work fully remotely. So yeah, this is one of the big, I would say in advance, unexpected wins from the work from home revolution.
Yes, agreed. So there were, let's kind of stick for a moment with this good news take on the rise of remote work. So we also saw an interesting paper about how remote work availability affected the so-called child wage penalty for women with young children. So there's a pattern in many studies that women who are on, let's say strong career trajectories after they have their first child experience a reduction in their wages, their earnings. So how is that related to remote work?
Yes, so as you say, there's a famous set of papers, Claudia Goldin, Henrik Kleiven, various people have shown. The numbers I remember roughly are, it's often focused on European countries actually where the data's best, but for men, after they have to get tax status, so you can see both men and women, you can tell if people are married, you can tell if they have dependents. So after the birth of their first child, you see male incomes is flat. In fact, on some countries it goes up a bit. Female incomes falls quite considerably, more in Southern and Central Europe and less in Northern Europe. But it's falling by numbers of like 20, 30, 40%, enormous amounts.
Big deal.
And 3 papers looked at this in the remote work conference. Some in, one was looking at South America, 2 in the US. What they show is in occupations that are you can work from home, so these kind of office type occupations, that female child penalty falls by about a half post-pandemic. That is a huge change. Interesting, the nuance of it is it falls by more than half in employment, but you see average hours actually go down relative for women. So what the story is that a lot of women will stay working, but they'll work at reduced hours. And in a sense, the long run looks very positive because, you know, you take maybe a year where your hours go from, let's say, 50 a week down to 30, but you stay employed, and then at some point you see the hours go back up again. So it looks like working from home, I mean, this is an old debate. Having worked on work from home for 20 years, pre-pandemic, people used to say flexi place goes with flexi time. So work from home is just choosing where you work is related to choosing when you work. Right. And you can see this very particularly, you know, when you've had as you know, when you had a young kid, you know, stuff comes up all the time. And so it looks like being able to work from home gives you more flexibility in how you work, and that keeps particularly women more in the labor force.
Right. Yes, I think that's right. I mean, so the way I would think about it is the ability to work from home some of the time gives you more, as you say, more flexibility in where you work and when you work. That kind of flexibility is extremely valuable when you have young kids in the household. Anybody who has had young kids, you have, I have, knows that's true. And it remains the case and today that by and large women are more likely to take on those responsibilities than men. It's not true in every marriage, but it's true on average. It's been true historically on average. And so if you can somehow facilitate sticking with a career path while taking on some of those responsibilities that come with more kids, that's going to give better career outcomes, better earnings outcomes. That's what the data seem to suggest. And it resonates with other things that you and I and Jose Maria Barrera and our other collaborators have found in many contexts in many countries, which is among the people who most value the flexibility that comes with working remotely part of the week are people with kids. Yeah. And that's true. That's true in almost every country. We've looked at more than 24 countries on this respect. I think it's true in every country. And it's true for men and women. Yeah. Okay, so it's not just that all of this extra childcare responsibility when you work remotely is falling on women, which some people are concerned about. But men also have a stronger desire to spend time working at home if they've got kids.
There's a paper showing in the American Time Use Survey amongst graduates, university graduates, that working from home increases the amount of childcare of both parents, but interestingly more for men than women. So the base level of childcare is higher, not surprisingly for women, but the delta, the increase from work from home is actually, turns out to be higher in the Time Use Survey. I think one thing it highlights for any managers or firms listening is that work from home policy is tightly connected to diversity policy. So particularly if you're in an industry where there's relatively more men than women, which is true of, say, tech or finance.
Right.
If you're doing Amazon, you get really tough on work from home. You're going to have, that's going to exacerbate the issue. It's also true for folks with a disability. It's also true actually for minorities. I mean, we had some other work and other people have shown it. It's not that minorities want a massively more work from home, but at the margin, you see they have a slightly higher preference to work from home. So if you force folks back
to then office, our work was minority in your own workplace.
Yes,
that
exactly.
was the key things. And it wasn't just about gender and skin color and ethnicity, but even religious persuasion and political beliefs.
I agree.
So if you're the only Republican in a Democrat-dominated office, you might want to work from home more just because it's hard to deal with it all, and vice versa. So I thought that was a really interesting aspect. I don't think we've published that stuff anywhere yet because we still need to develop it more. There was another paper, very different economic setting in terms of economic development, but we had a paper by Suhani Jalota and Lisa Ho that looked at what happened when you offered short-term gig employment opportunities to women in West Bengal, India. And just background is India has extremely low female labor force participation rates in the urban areas as well as I think rural areas. So it's viewed as an issue. And what they did, they ran an experiment. I won't get all the details right, but it was a randomized controlled trial experiment in which they gave some women from kind of lower middle income working class households the ability to work on a smartphone for a short-term gig assignment. And these were real jobs. They cooperated with tech companies. Basically, they were doing tasks, machine learning type training tasks, where you need humans to provide the labels on pieces of text and so on. And what they found is the most interesting result in their study, to my mind, is that even after these short-term gig jobs ended, the women who had participated in one of these jobs as compared to the ones on the other branch of the randomized controlled trial that didn't get this opportunity, 12 months later, they were more likely to be working on other jobs. Yeah. So it looks as if these short-term gateway jobs provided short-term gig jobs provided a gateway to longer-term employment, possibly eroding gender norms in the household or in the local communities and so on, or just giving these women, many of whom had not worked in the marketplace outside the household before, an opportunity to experience and to find out, you know what, I like this, or I'm good at it, and I like the income, so I want to keep doing it. I thought that was also a very interesting study.
So yes, they actually have two related papers. This is Lisa Ho and Sahani Jalota. I know because Sahani's advisor. I mean, she's
at Hoover now. By
exactly
the way.
Right. Right. You know, she's a proud employee of Hoover. So what they show is that in India there's incredibly low female employment rates, not just because there's discrimination, but also there's major harassment risk for women going into the workplace, and also some social discrimination. So apparently husbands in many of these households see it as embarrassing that their wives are going to work and try and hide it. So what they show is when you offer men, they randomize for both men and women these different jobs where they're working from home or out of the workplace and randomize how much they pay. For men, they just basically take the highest hourly wage. They don't care where it is, whatever pays the most, they're there. For women, it turns out they massively favor work from home jobs. So they'll take even a 50% pay cut in order to be able to work from home because it's so important for them. And then exactly as you said, it turns out there's a double bonus. These work from home jobs have this stepping stone effect that after doing that for 6 months, maybe their husbands are persuaded, or maybe, they feel more confident, and they start to go out of the house and take other jobs as well.
Yeah, I just want to underscore and reiterate one thing you said, and it was about another. It wasn't the paper at this year's conference. It's the paper of theirs at the previous year's conference that the take-up rate for women when they were offered these short-term gig jobs, working with a smartphone, training, doing machine learning training, they were much, much more sensitive to the working arrangements themselves than they were to the wage.
Yep.
So in that earlier study, they gave them a couple of options. You could work from home on your smartphone, or you could work at a local office, typically like a 5-minute or less walk away, where there were only women and where they had childcare service providers at the office. And it turned out that many women who weren't willing to go the 5 minutes outside the household, perhaps because then it will become visible to the neighbors or the husband and so on, not exactly clear, much higher take-up rate when they could work from home. That was really interesting, and that if you're trying to just operate on the wage margin, that wasn't a very powerful margin. It was the working arrangements themselves that is what drew women into the labor force and then had this stepping stone effect that you described.
I have a very extreme anecdote to this. I was talking to a reporter from Voice of America, and she said, in Afghanistan, the Taliban bans women from working. And there are a number of foreign NGOs that had female employees when this ban came in place. And the only way that women could continue to work is that they were fully working from home, because then the Taliban didn't actually know. So, that's an even... So
it's a more extreme case, but it illustrates the point.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting. Often I'll talk to folks that say, well, there isn't an enormous gender divide in the US on work from home, which is true. There's some mild preference, slightly greater preference of women than men. But as you point out, it's mainly about having kids. But that gap grows much larger as you go down the development level.
Yes, yes. So I thought that was another very hopeful story, really, about the potential for remote work and remotable jobs to bring women into the labor force, and there are probably lots of other positive effects that come with that in terms of their role in the household and their sense of autonomy and so on, and their ability to help contribute to the support of the family. So one more topic, you among others have put together quite a bit of evidence on the impact of the big rise in remote work on real estate valuations, including commercial real estate valuations. And we know now from a number of studies, we had a podcast earlier in this series today about this, but that commercial real estate values in core urban areas have really collapsed in many of them as a consequence of, now we have many fewer inward commuters, we have many fewer people spending their dollars during the workday, and in some cities like San Francisco, there's been an exodus of people living there as well. So commercial real estate valuations have really taken it on the chin. We had a study that looked at what that meant for banks, okay? I don't know if you remember that study, but there were a large number of banks in the United States, often mid-sized banks, if I remember correctly, that have quite a bit of exposure to what is now distressed commercial real estate in urban areas. And the paper provided evidence, first to the extent to which they were exposed, but also that greater exposure, and they measured this in ex-ante ways too, like what was the occupational and industry distribution in the cities where those banks were operating before the pandemic struck. But greater exposure to the pandemic through the remote work and its impact on real estate values means weaker balance sheets for the bank, less willingness to extend additional C&I loans, commercial and industrial loans, higher rates, stricter screening standards when they're making lending decisions, and even some evidence of spillover to resident, the willingness to make residential real estate loans. So that was a pretty interesting study. It's related to also Amit Saru his name came up earlier today, but he's also got some interesting work about some vulnerabilities in the balance sheets of commercial banks. So we're not out of the woods yet with respect to the financial repercussions of the rise of remote work for banks and for some cities and so on.
Yeah, exactly. The other area I've seen this a lot is for cities. So think of like San Francisco, our nearest city. The budgetary impact for them is pretty grim. Yes. Because revenues are down, less people are living and working in the city. If anything, costs may be up because you've got to pay for more social services, more police. Right. And it's not like they were running a huge surplus pre-pandemic, so now they're in big deficit. They have to figure out what to do. So yes, part of the issue is in the US, cities are very small in their size. So if you think of San Francisco, if I move 45 minutes out of the city because I want a bigger space and commute in 2 days a week, I'm no longer in the tax base of San Francisco. San Francisco, the city is only 49 square miles. Amazingly, it does not include either the airport or Golden Gate Bridge. So it's like, what? San Francisco is tiny. Unlike London, my own hometown of London is 500 square miles. So in London, if you move out to what you think is the suburbs, you're still included in London.
Yes, that's a really good point, and I think it's one that most Americans don't appreciate. We have a somewhat unusual fiscal federalist structure, and it is highly localized, as you say, so that there's less spreading out of the costs and benefits in terms of the local tax base in the United States than there would be, say, in the UK or France or Germany, where their tax bases are less localized, less tied to the local property tax base, and in some cases local sales tax revenues. So that does lead to more acute fiscal distress, localized fiscal distress problems in the United States than most other countries, most other rich countries. Plus, we've had a bigger shift to remote work. So the shock is bigger in the United States, and it interacts with our local fiscal structure in a way that's maybe more pernicious in the United States than many other countries. Now, Nick, I don't want to end on a downbeat note. Yeah. So I want to turn, I don't think it was this year's conference, I think it was last year's conference, but I know it's one of your favorite work from home papers of all time, and that's about work from home and burglars. So what's the story there? What is work from home meant for burglars?
Yeah, I know. This was the paper that I told journalists. You can't imagine what comes up. So it turns out even burglars have noticed work from home. So the paper is actually called Eyes on the Street. But the idea was, look, I'm working from home. Which burglar wants to break in where there's some person sitting in their living room typing away on their laptop? And even if you don't happen to break in and find, someone in the house, you may be breaking into a neighbor and they're, looking out the window and seeing someone with one of those black masks, swag bag, and a striped top breaking in. So apparently burglaries are dramatically down, and this was UK data in parts of the country where work from home's gone up a lot. What's happened is criminals have shifted. So this is one of the reasons there's apparently more crime in city centres, that not as many eyes on the street as they put it. There's actually more crime in city centres, and a bunch of this is burglars that have taken their trade to somewhere else.
Okay, so if we are consulting for burglars, we know what to tell them. Get out of the residences, especially the one where a lot of people are working from home. Go to those empty office buildings downtown.
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone, there's apparently a whole industry of people buying those human mannequins that you put on your passenger seat to fake, the toll lanes. So in the US, if you have two passengers in the car, you don't have to pay a toll. But there's a whole industry of these, fake dummies sat there dressed up. You're now going to take those things and put them in your living room to persuade any, would-be potential burglar there's someone working from home.
Preferably with a computer screen in front of them. And,
right.
Maybe they look like they're typing away.
I use it an example. I had some work on golf. I work from home has led to
tell us that story too.
Well, I mean, we should end on this, but it's hard to think of any area of the economy it hasn't touched. So in another project, in fact, with the Stanford undergrad here called Alex Finnan, we got data on usage of over 3,000 US golf courses. And what you see is pre-pandemic, people basically play golf on Saturday, Sunday, or maybe a bit before work. But it's pretty quiet in the working day. Post-pandemic, golf is just like maxed out every day, day in, day out. And it's just work from home folks that, they're working from home on Wednesday and they decide to have a round of golf. I actually think this isn't bad, but I often tell managers, remember, many of these are your employees. So you want to have, performance evaluation systems. You're not checking out at their desk. You just want to check they get their job done. So they play golf. That's fine.
There's a very important,
they need
serious,
to work, make it up in the evening.
Very important, serious point here. If you're going to make work from home work for your organization, whether it's fully remote or hybrid, you need management, you need employee evaluation assessment systems that allow you to do what you're saying, evaluate people on performance. And if you're accustomed to just watching people and making sure they're working hard because you got eyes on them all the time, or their coworkers are watching them, that management style does not extend to a remote work environment.
Exactly right.
That's a very important point.
And with that said, I better get back to the office to watch what's going on,
I want to say one more thing as we close. The burglary and golf examples kind of are great for illustrating the breadth of remote work's impact across economics. But the other thing that really struck me about our conference this year is we had psychologists, we had economists of every possible stripe you can imagine. We had behavioral scientists, we had organization behavior people, sociology people. This topic is attracting people from many, many disciplines, which makes it a lot of fun for us as researchers.
I agree. In fact, tomorrow I'm, oddly enough, going to talk to a group of folks in what's called Grand Rounds, so over in the med school.
Yes,
and
Dr. Nick.
Well, I'm a failed doctor in my family. Both my sisters and my dad are doctors. I have a PhD, they're kind of a proper doctorate. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, even for them, I've talked to the med school here quite a few times because obviously the doctors mostly have to go in person, but not completely. My neighbor across the road, Terry, she's a physician, and she says, one day a week you can do telehealth, and often the patients prefer it. Like if I've got to get a renewal of a prescription, I don't want to go in, I just want to do it over telehealth. And the medicine and the back office staff, for sure. I mean, the nurses and doctors may mostly go in, but...
Nick, you're the only economist I know who could go from commercial real estate, banking stress, burglary, golf, grand rounds. So good for you. Thanks so much
Thank you.
Thanks so much for
on that point.
appearing on the show. All right. Take care, Nick.